Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Finding out where you come from is supposed to bring closure, but what happens when the answer isn't what you expected? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're following Julian's story, an adult who set out to find his birth mother, only to face a reality many people fear. She didn't want to be found. As you listen today, you'll learn everyday English vocabulary for expressing grief, setting boundaries, and finding peace on your own terms. Let's get into Chapter 1.
Julian sat at his desk, staring at the thick manila envelope that had arrived in the mail that morning. For as long as he could remember, a small part of his mind had always wondered about his origins, the missing pieces of his medical history, the quiet mystery of where his features came from, and the lingering question of why his birth mother had chosen to place him for adoption 30 years ago. His adoptive parents had given him an incredible life, filled with love, security, and unwavering support. Yet the desire to know his roots remained. After months of internal debate, Julian had finally ordered his non-identifying adoption records from the state registry. Non-identifying records contain basic information like the birth parents' ages, occupations, and general health, but omit all full names and contact details to protect everyone's privacy. With a deep breath, Julian unsealed the document. The pages were filled with faded typewritten details from 3 decades past. Reading about a 22-year-old college student who loved classic literature and played the cello made his birth mother feel like a real person for the first time, rather than an abstract concept. A sudden wave of determination washed over him. Looking at the birth city listed at the bottom of the last page, Julian knew that reading about her background wasn't enough anymore. He pulled up his laptop and opened a web browser, ready to bridge the gap between curiosity and truth. The quiet search had officially begun. Julian spent the next 3 weeks spending late nights in front of his glowing computer screen. Armed with only a birth city, his birth mother's age, and her interest in music, finding her felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. He spent hours browsing digital municipal archives, old college yearbooks, and local community message boards. Every lead felt like a potential breakthrough, but most turned out to be dead ends. Realizing he needed expert guidance, Julian reached out to an online group of search angels, volunteers who help adoptees trace their biological families for free. A search angel named Sarah reviewed his non-identifying documents and suggested cross-referencing public voter registries with local university graduation lists from 30 years prior. Together, they spent days narrowing down names that matched the narrow time frame and geographical location. Late on a Tuesday evening, Sarah sent Julian a link to a social media profile, along with a simple message: "I think this might be her." Julian clicked the link, his heart pounding against his ribs. The screen revealed a woman in her early 50s holding a cello, living just 2 hours away in a neighboring town. Her smile and the shape of her eyes were strikingly familiar. It was like looking into a mirror across time. After weeks of dead ends, the abstract memory had finally become a living, breathing person.
Julian stared at a blank document on his computer screen for over an hour, unsure of how to begin. How do you introduce yourself to the person who gave you life but hasn't seen you in 30 years? He wanted to reach out, but he knew that dropping out of the blue could cause overwhelming shock or fear. Over the next few days, Julian wrote and discarded dozens of drafts. In some versions, he wrote too much, pouring out every question and emotion he had carried since childhood. In other versions, he sounded cold and formal, like a detective conducting an official interview. He wanted to make one thing completely clear. He was not looking to replace his adoptive parents, nor was he seeking financial support or causing trouble. He simply wanted to say thank you for giving him life and offer a gentle door for her to walk through if she wished. Finally, he settled on a short, heartfelt letter that struck a careful balance between honesty and respect for her privacy. He printed the page, placed it carefully inside a crisp white envelope, and addressed it to the town where Helen lived. Standing in front of the blue mailbox down the street, Julian hesitated for a single second before dropping the envelope into the slot. As he heard the heavy metal flap clack shut, a wave of relief mixed with sudden anxiety hit him. The message was officially on its way.
The days immediately following the mailing of the letter were filled with a restless, agonizing quiet. Every time Julian heard the metallic clatter of the mail slot in his front door, his pulse spiked with anticipation. He found himself constantly refreshing his email inbox, half expecting a sudden digital response, even though he had only provided his postal address and phone number. As 1 week stretched into 2, the initial wave of hopeful excitement began to curdle into quiet anxiety. The endless waiting started to bleed into his daily life, making it difficult to focus on his work projects or enjoy evening conversations with his adoptive parents. His mother noticed his sudden distraction during dinner one evening, offering a warm, knowing smile that made Julian feel a sting of guilt for keeping the search a secret. He constantly replayed the contents of his letter in his head, wondering if a specific word choice had scared her away, or if the letter had simply been lost in transit. The silence felt heavier with each passing afternoon, forcing Julian to realize that waiting for a response meant surrendering total control over his own narrative. He began to understand that the hardest part of any search isn't the research itself, but managing the emotional limbo when the clock is ticking and no answers come. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Julian's phone vibrated against his desk, displaying an unfamiliar local area code. He answered with a cautious greeting, expecting a routine telemarketer or spam call. Instead, a firm, guarded male voice on the line asked to speak with Julian directly. The stranger identified himself as a family lawyer representing Helen, Julian's biological mother. A cold chill ran down Julian's spine as the lawyer explained that Helen had received his letter earlier that week. The attorney stated that while Helen acknowledged the letter's respectful tone, she had no desire to establish contact, exchange messages, or meet in person. The lawyer added that the past was a closed chapter for her, and she politely but firmly requested that Julian respect her privacy and make no further attempts to reach out. Julian sat in stunned silence, the words echoing in his ears as the lawyer asked if he understood the boundary being set. He managed to stammer out a brief confirmation before the call ended, leaving him staring at the dead phone screen in total shock. The hopeful reunion he had spent months quietly imagining had crumbled into a blunt, legally delivered refusal in less than 2 minutes. Refusing to accept a cold statement from a lawyer as the final word, Julian spent the weekend consumed by a burning sense of unfairness. He convinced himself that Helen had acted out of panic and that seeing him in person would change everything. On Monday morning, Julian got behind the wheel and drove 2 hours to the small coastal town where Helen lived. He found the quiet bakery cafe where his research indicated she worked as a part-time accountant.
Sitting in a parked car across the street, Julian spotted Helen through the glass window as she handed a mug of coffee to a regular customer. Seeing her in motion, watching her smile, wipe down the counter, and laugh with a coworker sent a jolt of recognition through his chest. He placed his hand on the door handle, fully intending to walk inside, introduce himself, and demand 10 minutes of her time. Yet, as he watched her peaceful, completely unsuspecting routine, a heavy realization stopped him in his tracks. He saw a woman who had spent 30 years building a calm life, completely unaware that her past was standing on the curb watching her. Forcing his way into her sanctuary wouldn't create a connection. It would be an act of intrusion driven by his own desperation. Julian slowly withdrew his hand from the door handle, started the engine, and turned the car back toward home, without ever stepping inside.
The drive home from Helenstown felt like moving through a heavy fog. Over the next few weeks, the initial shock of rejection slowly gave way to a deep, lingering ache. Julian found himself spiraling into intense self-doubt, constantly asking questions that had no answers. Why wasn't I worth knowing? What is so wrong with me that my presence feels like a threat? The quiet refusal cut deeper than an angry argument ever could, leaving a hollow space in his chest. He began withdrawing from his friends, skipping workout sessions, and avoiding social gatherings altogether. At night, he would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the search in an endless loop of regret. He felt a painful disconnect between his reality and the heartwarming adoption stories he often saw online. The sense of rejection made him question his place in the world, confusing his past with his present value. Every time he looked in the mirror, he no longer just saw himself. He saw the reflection of a door that had been firmly shut in his face. It became clear that the hardest part of the rejection wasn't losing a relationship he never had. It was losing the imagined future he had built around it.
Unable to carry the weight of the rejection alone any longer, Julian invited his adoptive parents over for dinner. Sitting at the kitchen table, he finally opened up about the past few months, the search, the letter, the phone call from the lawyer, and his quiet drive to Helenstown. He braced himself for disappointment or hurt feelings, worried they might feel betrayed by his secret journey. Instead, his mother reached across the table and placed her hand over his, her eyes filled with gentle empathy. His father listened quietly before speaking, assuring Julian that wanting to know where he came from was a natural human impulse, not a sign of disloyalty. They didn't offer toxic positivity or try to minimize his pain. They simply sat with him in his grief and validated his feelings. His father reminded him that love is built through decades of presence, shared meals, scraped knees, and unconditional support, not just shared genetics. For the first time in months, Julian felt the heavy knot of guilt and isolation in his chest begin to loosen. Surrounded by the warmth of the people who had raised him, he realized he didn't need to earn a place in a family that had already given him one unconditionally.
Determined to process his grief in a healthy way, Julian scheduled an appointment with a counselor who specialized in adoption trauma. During their weekly sessions, they unpacked the complex emotional layers surrounding Helen's defensive reaction. The therapist helped Julian understand that a birth mother's refusal often stems from deep-seated shame, unresolved trauma, or fear of dismantling a life built on secrecy.
Julian began to realize that Helen's choice to remain distant was a reflection of her own unhealed past, not a judgment on his character or worth as a human being. This shift in perspective allowed him to separate his identity from her decision. He spent hours journaling on his back porch, slowly releasing the unrealistic expectations he had carried throughout the search. He recognized that closure isn't a gift given by someone else through a dramatic, emotional conversation. Instead, closure is a quiet choice you make for yourself to stop waiting for an answer that will never come. As the heavy anger and confusion began to fade, a sense of quiet compassion took its place. Julian realized he could respect Helen's decision to stay in the shadows while still honoring his own right to stand fully in the light.
6 months after the phone call from the lawyer, Julian sat at his desk on a clear Sunday afternoon. He pulled out a single sheet of stationery and began writing one final letter to Helen. This time, there were no pleas for a meeting, no desperate questions, and no contact numbers attached. He simply thanked her for giving him life, assured her that he respected her privacy completely, and wished her peace and health in the years ahead. He sealed the envelope, walked down to the neighborhood mailbox, and dropped it into the slot without a second of hesitation. As the metal flap clacked shut, Julian felt no lingering anxiety, no burning expectation, and no fear of the unknown. He walked back home through the quiet afternoon air, breathing deeply and feeling light on his feet for the first time in a long time. He understood now that his story was not defined by a missing biological connection or a closed door. His identity was shaped by the love that raised him, the resilience he had discovered within himself, and the clear future stretching out ahead of him. Julian smiled as he stepped onto his front porch, ready to live his life fully, whole on his own terms. Facing rejection or an unanswered question is never easy, but as Julian learned, true closure doesn't come from someone else. It's something we create for ourselves. Thank you for listening to Julian's story today. Which line or key phrase from today's story stood out to you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below to practice your English. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life English practice. Until next time, take care and keep learning. I will see you in the next story. Goodbye.